Welcome to the Ken Matthews Report. My pleasure to have BART SIBREL on. BART is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, investigative journalist, producing television programs, documentaries, music videos, TV commercials, stage plays for over 40 years. Starting at the age of 18, he even hosted his own television talk show. SIBREL has owned 5 video production companies. 2 of the 3 major networks have employed you. I think it's so interesting, Bart, that we get this out front because you know how misinformation works, and you have this incredible resume as a television news reporter, a producer. You've been on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, TLC, USA, BET, and now you're on the Ken Matthews Report. So I don't know if you want to put that on your resume or not.
It depends on how this goes,
You've also appeared as a seasoned actor on stage and screen 500 times now. I didn't know that about you. Are you still acting?
Yes, I am a husband. I am married. And so that comes in handy.
Yes, it does. I was going to say, are you acting now? Articles featuring SIBREL'S films have been published in Time Magazine, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today, and you have earned awards from the American Motion Picture Society, including Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Top 10 Director. And as I was saying before we started this interview, I just finished reading your book. I truly loved your book. And as I was reading your book, I was thinking of 2 movies in particular. Will Smith, Enemy of the State. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I think I saw it a long time ago.
Yeah, 1998. And Mel Gibson, Conspiracy Theory. And that's just because it's the title of it, not because of anything in your book that led me to that other than what people call you. So the book is Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list, the man behind the infamous A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which I've seen, and Astronauts Gone Wild. I've seen all your work. And for some reason, as of late, this has all come together, and it makes so much sense to me. And if I may, and then I'm going to shut up. If I may tell you what led me to even doing this is we are in an era of lies and just calling people conspiracy theorists. And over the last even 10 years, I look at where we are as a country, and I look at the 2020 election, 9/11, January 6th, COVID, go back to the Kennedy assassination, the global warming crisis. And so much of it has been manipulated. And so for people who are new to this concept, BART is probably, I would say you're the leading researcher on exposing what many believe was the fraud of the Apollo program landing on the moon. So with that, we just triggered some people. So I'm just going to sit back and you pick it up wherever you'd like to, because the book is incredible.
Well, what comes to mind listening to you, Ken, is a comment that Tucker Carlson made about a year ago. He said when he first heard that the NSA was listening to the private conversations of a president of the United States, he thought that was as crazy as the moon landings being faked. And then he realized it was true. What he's failed to do is to do part 2. The moon landing fraud is the poster child of conspiracy theories. In fact, when Susan, what's her name from YouTube, the multimillionaire who took away my measly $1,000 a month income,
I remember that
moon landing fraud films.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing out of her mouth before Congress is we need to stop people from saying things like the moon landings are fake. Now, here's the thing. Go to SIBREL.com, watch all the videos for free, get the book if you're so inclined. You will discover, if you have an open mind and are generally a truth seeker, they really did fake the moon landing. And when you come to that realization, as you know from the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon that I produced, it was financed by a millionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows it's fake. who thought it was his patriotic duty to expose it. I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that
Right.
they faked it. I was a big fan. I mean, more so. I had a shrine in my house to Apollo 11. I saw these pictures every day for 10 years or more. That's, 3 times a day, 10 years. That's over 10,000 times believing it was
Hmm.
real and mesmerized by it. But you have to have an open mind. I talked to a college professor who said even if he saw Neil Armstrong confess on national TV that the moon landings were fake, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. I
Well,
mean,
it's
that's dangerous,
and again, I'm gonna promote the living heck out of your website because it's filled with really good stuff. One of the things I'm gonna cherry pick out of the book because I know you tell the story so much better, but I love the way you reflected on the film you did, Astronauts Gone Wild. I love your hindsight assessment of that. It came with age, it came with maturity. You realized, that was kind of a hard, it was almost like a not clickbait, but because I don't like to do clickbait, and that's why I waited so I could really deep dive into where your research is, and I look at it, and you have clearly explained that landing on the moon defies logic and science. And then what people that attacked you, they try to do what they attack anybody that questions a narrative. And that is saying it. And I'll give you just an example. I started questioning 9/11 about 2008. Okay. And the attacks are always, so you don't think 9/11 happened? You don't think people died? No, that's not at all. You know how so they would come to you, and I've seen it. Oh, this guy doesn't even believe NASA exists. Where did those rockets go? Well, if you do the research like you have shared with them, the rockets do go up. They just don't go high enough. They get out of our view, and that's where the narrative begins. That's what really clinched it for me. The initial 250-mile orbit limit and then the latest 350-mile orbit limit. That alone clinched it for me. And the fact that I just printed out 2 articles from today, all excited that we're going back to the moon in the next 7 years. And I'm like, why didn't you just fire up Apollo 11? So that's what really clinched it for me. And
yeah,
and the fact that you've been a NASA fan since you were like 3.
well, there are pretty much 4 incontrovertible proofs that they didn't go to the moon. The first is the following, which is just deductive reasoning. Today, Elon Musk says in order to land people on the moon, you have to make 8 fuel trips first to have enough fuel. Von Braun said the same thing. He said it's impossible to go to the moon in one rocket. We have it in writing from Von Braun. He says the minimum would be 3 rockets, but they'd be taller than the Empire State Building. They'd weigh 10 times the amount of the Queen Mary. It'd be an economic impossibility to build them, and they'd weigh 800,000 tons each. The Saturn V Apollo rocket, slight difference, 2,500 tons instead of 800,000 tons, a difference of 30,000%. Now, every technological milestone in the past, let's say the telephone, okay, that happened more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago, really. And now today, telephones are better, faster, cheaper, coast to coast, flat rates, no more 50 cents a minute long distance.
Right.
Aircraft, cheaper, better, goes farther. The light bulb, better, cheaper.
Mhm.
Splitting the atom. You can now more and more people have nuclear reactors. For the first time in history, there's a technological milestone that no one can do 50 years later. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
you can turn on a telephone, it's better and faster. You can turn on a light bulb, it's better and faster. You can split the atom cheaper and more efficiently and more powerfully. And yet you can't get in a rocket and go to the moon anymore for some reason. In fact, today, with 50 years better technology, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. So that's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon, right? So what they're really claiming is back in the 60s, before cell phones, before microwave ovens, when
Right.
all of NASA's computer power was 1/1,000,000th of a cell phone, they sent astronauts on the first attempt ahead of schedule 1,000 times farther into space than they can do today, than Elon Musk can do today. That defies logic. The problem is, like you mentioned with JFK, it's a tragedy. It's simply changing hats on who did it and why, or 9/11. All those people are dead. It's simply changing who did it
Hmm.
and why. This is different. This is a positive lie. This is something people cried and waved their flag, and I'm coming along trying to take away that candy, and they are defending it to the point where they said if Neil Armstrong confessed it was a fraud, they'd
Right.
still think he walked on the moon anyway. It's a god to people. And as you know, putting a man on the moon is mankind's greatest accomplishment. And when I found classified footage, you can watch it for free at SIBREL.com, of them faking being halfway to the moon with a 1-foot model, dated 2 days into the flight with the third track of audio of the CIA, tell
Yep.
them to fake a 4-second radio delay to make it appear they're beyond Earth orbit when they're still in Earth orbit, as the bright Earth is out the window in this unedited footage. This is 3.5 years into the 7-year project. I'm looking at it. I'm going, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. And I'm just grieving for mankind. This is who we are. This is who our federal government is. Now, there were many things I was asked not to put in my movie because certain people were still alive pursuing their own legal course of action.
Right. Oh,
I read it myself in audio, Kindle or print, including my interview of 4 hours with Betty Grissom, the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, but he wouldn't cooperate. And he was a whistleblower, and he kept complaining and filing reports to senators and congressmen
oh,
that
and
they're a decade away.
so people know, and that's a beautiful part in your book, by the way. That's another thing that clinched it for me. When Bart's saying he wouldn't cooperate, he cooperated with Bart, and their family cooperated with you. You're still in touch with the Grissom family. In fact, Gus Grissom, his son is involved in this, exposing the truth. He wouldn't cooperate with NASA. And
Correct.
the fact that he kept going back and saying, we're not ready, this is unsafe. Then they changed the door on it and all the other things. If this is what's so frustrating, Bart, the book is so powerful, and I'm not just blowing smoke. I try to read at least a book a week, and there's so much meat in it that at the very least, people should further investigate this, because this could be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, deceptions. This could eclipse COVID and, telling me that 2020 was a secure election and January 6th was an armed insurrection. This is bigger than that. And you nailed it when you said it's a positive lie. People are married to it. It's patriotic. They almost feel guilty, if they say, I don't think we really went to the moon. What does that make me as an American? Have I sold
Well, the
out
thing is,
America?
as you know from the book, so the first proof is you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than today. It's
Yep.
never happened in the history of the world that a technological milestone couldn't be repeated 50 years later, and that they had greater technology in the past. It's
Hmm.
historical and scientific impossibility. They didn't go. And then if you want me to share my screen or just go to SIBREL.com on the homepage, we have pictures of shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from
Hmm.
objects 5 feet apart. You could prove that in a court of law that they didn't go to the moon. I can do a screen share, you can insert it or whatever. I mean, you can, in fact, let me just do it. We're talking about it. Share screen
Well, and as
and
long as you're doing the
share.
screen share, here we go.
Yeah, here we
Got it.
go. Right?
Yeah, this is one of the classic. Now, this is one of the things years ago that started moving me in the direction of, this guy's making a good point. But I got to tell you, what clinched it for me is I watched several of your interviews and I started researching what you talked about in the book, and the fact that you have sources and just the behavior of the living astronauts that wanted nothing to do with this, and the thing that really clinched it for me was the radiation. And I know you're going to get into that soon. And that, to me, if all you science geeks out there, there's no way a human can survive the radiation that surrounds the planet. It's a physical impossibility. That's why the space shuttle can only go, what does the space shuttle go? 300, what is it, 350 miles, give or take?
Well, it generally stops at about 250 miles. At
Okay,
one
got it.
time, went up to about 265, and the
Okay.
radiation was so severe they descended to a safer altitude.
Now that to
So,
me is like, that to me is the glove that fits. So you must have quit right there. That the space shuttle, what, 50 years later said, we can't go any further, you know?
well, yeah, and one of the clips, my book is interactive. There's 17 video clips. I write a chapter, and then you go to sibrel.com, click on Moonman video links, and all
I
those you can
loved it.
watch for free now. We have a NASA engineer saying that there's a deadly radiation field high above the Earth, that every manned mission was below it. And to go to the moon, you'd have to go through it. And the technology to do so and not be killed has not been invented yet. He says so out of his own mouth. And that, of course, is why there's mannequins orbiting the moon, because they can't protect astronauts from radiation and they don't have enough fuel. But here's a photographic proof. I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real.
Right.
On the left is sunlight. The Earth's about 93 million miles away from the sun, which is 1 million times bigger than the Earth in volume. It's going to cast shadows in the same direction over an entire hemisphere and moon. So in sunlight, shadows always run parallel. It's scientifically impossible for them to intersect. On the right, a picture allegedly from the last mission to the moon, where an astronaut shadow is going at 12 o'clock and a rock 5 feet away with an equal shadow length, meaning it's the same light source, is at 90 degrees. Okay, from objects 5 feet apart, that's an electrical light, which means they're not on the moon, they're on Earth. You just proved the moon landing is a fraud in one photograph. It would prove it in a court of law. We have the logic. You can't have 1,000 times better space traveling technology in 1969 than today.
Yep.
And then we have the footage I uncovered. If you want me to, I could cue that up.
Sure. Go ahead and cue that up. And
shows them faking being halfway to the moon. Here is,
and I want to let people know that, because we are, this is the Wikipedia generation. This is the lazy researcher generation, I call it. Lazy research. Snopes is for dopes. They're Googling it right now, and then they bring up Wikipedia and it says, and I disagree. SIBREL'S theories have been repeatedly debunked. That's a bold-faced lie. Every debunking they attempted was a fraudulent debunking. Even the shadow debunking, they didn't do it with sunlight. They just rigged the lights differently. So when you do the deep dive on the research, you still cannot push back on the fact that you can't get through the radiation. We haven't been higher than 350 miles ever with a human. No country has. And yet you go to Wikipedia. See, this is what really pushed me to reach out to you, because I'm so tired of every single thing is being manipulated. And the only way we can research it, we're not allowed to ask questions. We're not allowed to go and do interviews like this in mainstream. We just have Wikipedia and Snopes and some of the other crap that blows the same smoke. You know what I mean?
well, let me, I'll go back to screen sharing here to talk about this face to face. About 2 years ago, year and a half ago, maybe, the former Russian director of the space agency, retired, said the Apollo missions were fake. In fact, I know someone who works in the Chinese space agency, and he said everybody knows it's fake. They're blackmailing NASA in exchange for space technology, which is illegal for NASA to give them, in exchange for not blowing the whistle on the Apollo fraud, because they have pictures of the landing sites, then there's nothing there. And so this is pretty serious business that they really did fake the moon landing. And I was reluctant to admit it myself. And I found this footage. Now, Fox, the next day after the Russian person said that, and it made some mainstream media outlets online, the very next day, Fox News, which cancels their #1 program, So I don't think they're interested in making money, are they? They're interested in controlling the information. They
Right.
call me up and say, we're going to do an hour-long special on the moon landing fraud. The day after the Russian director, space director, says Apollo moon landings are fake. Fox News calls me the next day. We're going to do an hour-long special. And then they say, I appreciate their honesty. We haven't read your book. We haven't seen your film. And irregardless of the content, we will conclude that the moon landings are real at the end of the program. Just wanted you to know that. So
Welcome
they
to
did no
Pravda.
research. They
Pravda.
admitted they did no research. They
Yep.
admitted that even if my book and film proves that the moon missions are fake, they will irregardless conclude it was real. And then during the program, which I watched, they showed a quote from 1969 of one Russian scientist saying, "Congratulations," and proclaimed, "The Russians think we win." They failed to mention that 6 weeks ago, the very point of their program being produced was the Russian Space Agency director said it was fake. And so Fox News is running propaganda. Now, I showed this footage I'm about to show you
Right.
to the director of NBC News, who practically fainted. He said, "This absolutely proves they never left Earth orbit, meaning the moon missions are fake." And I'm like, yeah, when are we going to broadcast it? And he said, "I'm not going to go down in history as the man who caused the next civil war. I'm not going to
Wow.
broadcast it."
And for
10
people
years go
watching,
by.
you get all this at your Sibrel.com
Yeah, and we're
website.
going to show this footage. And then 10 years later, another news director comes on board. They fly me to New York, put me up in the Waldorf Astoria, give
I
me
remember that.
thousands of dollars for the exclusive license,
Right.
interview me about it. They're going to break the story nationwide until they get a call from the federal government threatening them to not air the program exposing the moon landing fraud, and they comply. And let me show you the footage that that convinced me that the moon landings were fake. So let me bring up my Brave browser. On the left here is classified footage we uncovered of an unedited reel of one shot of the mission, which they only broadcast about 10 seconds of, maybe 20 seconds of. On the right is the footage. As you can see, it's the same. This is supposed to be the Earth floating in space, right? This thing is timestamped by NASA's computer, which I'm sure knows how to tell time, 2 days into the flight, where they're supposed to be halfway to the moon. Now, for the segment that they wanted to air, I'll turn up the volume. Hopefully, the microphone will pick it up. Neil Armstrong is lying, saying he's 130,000 miles out, or about halfway to the moon.
Apollo 11. And then from about 130,000 miles out.
Okay, so here he is claiming to be 130,000 miles out on the right-hand side.
Okay.
And then we have over here on the left the unedited footage that I got. He says the camera is up against the window's glass, as it would have to be, but the camera's really at the back of the spacecraft. They've turned out all the lights. It's a work light in the top left corner, and that's a circular window that has part of the Earth outside of it. They insert a crescent piece of material to make it look like the Terminator line, and that's a 1-foot model of the Earth. They're pretending to be halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. And then there's a third track of audio of the CIA prompting them with talk only after a 4-second radio delay. That's part of the window of their, getting in front of the window.
Right.
And this is the proof that they are, in fact, faking being halfway to the moon. Here's a full screen of it. A moment ago, they said this was the Earth floating in space, but we have the unedited version that at the beginning of it says, "Do not show to the public." And here they are breaking down the shot. That's actually the circular window outside of which it's filled with the Earth in low Earth orbit. And it's a pretty clever shot. It looks like the Earth floating in space when it's really a circular window with the Earth outside of it. And there you go. That's them faking being halfway to the moon. And even my critics agree that's them faking being halfway to the moon.
Right.
2 NBC News directors agree. Every photographer I've shown it to agrees. They're faking being halfway to the moon 2 days into the flight from Earth orbit, and they can't be walking on the moon a day later when it's supposed to take 3 days to get there.
Exactly.
And they all had identical equipment. So if one Volkswagen Bug can't go 500 miles an hour, none of them can. And then the shadows intersecting at 90 degrees is from the last mission, so they never went. That's why it takes 8 fuel trips, which they didn't have. That's why the radiation field, no one has gone through, even the Soviets or the Chinese. They really did fake the moon landing. So you can't have greater technology in the past. I showed you video footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. I
Right.
showed you shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. And then we have, as I'm editing my book, which took me 15 years to write, 2 years to edit, I'm put in touch with a gentleman by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers.
Oh, now
Okay?
before you get to that,
Yeah, go ahead.
because first of all, I can't recommend the book enough. It really is well written. I just so I can your emotion and your authenticity in it. And I wanted to mention again the way you interacted with the Grissams, the way you interact with people. You're not, you could tell you didn't start out to try to create a gotcha moment. You started out because you thought this was so outlandish. This couldn't be true. I have to just prove it to myself. There's no way they would have faked it. And that's how you started your journey. And you can see as the book evolves, you could see it's like every now and then you get punched in the gut. And I felt that reading it. The other thing I want to tell our audience of the Ken Matthews Report is remember, nobody's saying they didn't go into space. Nobody's saying that, wasn't it John Glenn and Jupiter, right? Nobody's saying that didn't happen. They're saying that once they got out of view, we had to rely on the government to give us the information because it wasn't open to the public. There wasn't no one was running around on the moon with their iPhone uploading to TikTok. Once it left our atmosphere in the Saturn V, and I grew up in Florida, I saw so many of those liftoffs. I forgot to tell you that. But once it got out, then it was like, okay, what's really now what? What's going on up there? And you've clearly explained that the most important part of this historical journey was manipulated. So this is not.
Yeah, there's no independent press coverage. It's not like World War II going on Earth in front of billions of eyewitnesses. There's no eyewitnesses.
And no one can
the
produce
the idea that because it involved 100,000 contractors or more, that somehow, they couldn't keep a secret. Well, that's because they didn't know. I mean, do you really think the CIA is so stupid to tell the guy making the glove or the door handle or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon. Be sure not to tell anybody. The fact is, Eugene Krantz, flight director, said, a person in the command center can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and a, quote, real flight, just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. And so the atomic bomb involved 129,500 people, and only 8 people knew what they were building. So certainly the bank teller at Wells Fargo and the CEO of Wells Fargo have a different understanding of the corruption that's going on.
Very well put. And that is it's such a lame rebuttal, because I know I've heard the rebuttals to this, just like I've heard rebuttals to 9/11 fact arguments and election arguments. And the rebuttals are they make no sense. Like you just wipe the floor with these rebuttals that, well, 100,000 or 70,000 people worked on it. They think they're all lying? No, I think they're all in a silo. They're all compartmentalized, like in the military. Here's your mission. Your mission is the wheel, the tire. Your mission is perimeter. Your mission is to go inside.
And then they also destroyed, as you know, all the original diagrams, all the original blueprints, all the original hardware, all the original telemetry data as to where the rocket was, and all the original videotapes.
Why would you do that? With such a historic event,
perpetrated a fraud. You see, if there's ever a technology that we're gonna destroy intentionally, I mean, one of the clips of the book, when you can watch these for free, SIBREL.com, top left button, is NASA saying they intentionally destroyed all the equipment, all the diagrams. Maybe they should have considered doing that with the atomic bomb, but just 10 years later, the atomic bomb was 1,000 times more explosive.
Right.
So if they could go to the moon ahead of schedule on the first attempt with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we
Right.
would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now. There'd be bases all over the moon. The Soviets split the atom, I think, 3 years after we did. So if we really went to the moon, they probably would have been on the moon 3 years
Right.
later, when in fact, they probably should have been there before us, because they did every space milestone first, and to this day have not gone.
And
then
see,
the
this is
latest
something else I want you to, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I want you to recap this for people that are hearing this for the first time. There's people hearing this for the first time that think, what is this guy talking about? The Soviets never beat us in anything. No, they beat us in every single space thing until we started the space race, and then we started our propaganda. There was a propaganda war going on. And explain to people that are new to this theory how much success the Soviets had in space before us.
Well, every success, every milestone was theirs, 100% of them, except going to the moon, which was a bluff, like in poker when they pretended to have a good hand. The first satellite, Soviet Union. The first animal, Soviet Union. The first man, Soviet Union. First Earth orbit, Soviet Union. First woman, Soviet Union. First spacewalk, Soviet Union. First of 2 crews at the same time, 2 spacecrafts at the same time, Soviet Union. First crew of 3, Soviet Union. For every 10 hours we spent in space, they spent 50 hours. And they never went to the moon to this day. Now, the idea that Russia and China would blow the whistle, as therefore they haven't, therefore the moon landings must be real. I told you, I know someone working in the Chinese agency Space Command Center who says everybody there knows that it's fake. They're blackmailing NASA for space technology. The Soviets are doing the same thing. I have a video, it just came out in November, of the latest AI. They have these, conferences of all businesses. We go to NAB broadcasters. They have ones for shoes and automobiles. They had an AI conference, and instead of being in London or Paris, it was in Moscow. All the world leaders, top AI people there in November.
I remember that.
And just as you see the latest car that can, get 150 miles per gallon that never hits the market, you're allowed to drive around the track during the show. They let people for 3 days experiment with the most advanced AI. Several AIs hooked together by Google, called Google's neural network.
Yep.
Some teams had it write a symphony, some teams had it write a novel, and one team wanted to take advantage of its deep fake detector program, which has never been wrong. You can feed it a video of Biden or Trump, and in less than 1 second, it can tell you whether the video is real or not. So they first feed it pictures from 2014 of probes of China on the moon's surface.
Right.
And it says they're really on the moon. These are real pictures. Then a few minutes later, they feed them pictures from the Apollo program. Every single picture they feed it, they say is fake background, fake foreground, fake this, fake that. And if you try to find the original link to this article, it says if you click on it, all the data on your computer will be stolen and you'll be associated with child pornography. Don't believe me? Go to my YouTube channel and I got a screenshot of it. That's how overwhelming the AI proving the moon landings are fake is, that no one has heard about it, and they're literally trying to suppress it. Putin is there. We have a video of Putin being showed the AI's conclusion about the Apollo missions being fake. Doesn't look surprised at all. In fact, looks a little scared that the truth might come out and he can no longer blackmail the United States.
See, that's what I was going to say. If you have a nugget of truth like that, it's so much more advantageous. It's like the way they blackmail politicians. If the politician comes out and says, okay, I was doing crack with this prostitute and I took money from China, what do you got on him? But if you have a videotape of all that, he's going to be your puppet. And I think this is, how do you get people that, because we're truth seekers, people that watch you, people that read your book, people that watch this show, they are hungry because they've been manipulated and lied to about everything from medicine to science to elections to electric cars. They're hungry to find the truth. To me, this is so logical. You've married the logic and the science, and it makes total sense. And why people don't even want to, what do you think is the biggest thing that prevents people from even considering this? Is it guilt? Is it fear?
No,
What
it's pride.
pride?
Pride is the unwillingness to be wrong, and humility is the willingness to be wrong.
Interesting.
They said of the Tower of Babel, until about 200 years ago, the greatest technology for thousands of years has been the tallest building. How tall can you build one without it collapsing on itself?
Right.
And in Genesis 6, it says the only reason they built the Tower of Babel was to show off, to boast. And it was never finished. And that's considered to be an object of ridicule, starting something that you don't finish. And then millennia go by. They've invented the telegraph, the telephone, the radio, and they produced the largest single machine of the hand of man, the ship, the Titanic. And they put in print in a poster, the ship that God himself cannot sink.
There's some
Tower of
arrogance.
Babel never finished. Titanic never made one voyage. And then Richard Nixon, get this, he doesn't show up for the first launch, shows up for the second one after they got away with it, because he knew it was fake. And who knew they would get away with it? What if they got caught? And there's that picture of him grinning, shaking Neil Armstrong's hand beforehand. You had the president of Germany there, the president of Japan there, but not the president of the United States. And then he said of this mission that he knew was fraudulent,
Right.
putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to God making the universe. You see, when it dawns on you, as it did me, with tears coming down my eyes, realizing how they really did fake it. It's so heartbreaking for mankind.
Yeah.
The faking of the moon landing. This is what people have to understand. Two things, and thanks for letting me talk. The first thing is the faking of the moon landing is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. Historically, either they planted a flag, came back, even though they can only go 1,000th as far today, or they lied to mankind. They embezzled an equivalent of $250 billion. As you know, they murdered Apollo astronauts. The relatives told me the CIA murdered them, not me. They did that to cover it up. They printed it on coins. They printed it on stamps. It's in every encyclopedia, and they gave them medals of honor for being such good liars. By the most powerful nation on earth, the greatest event of the hand of man, if that's true that they faked it, that is so profound. And yet it's not officially known, which means we have this cure for cancer. We can't progress if our piano is out of tune. I have my nephew, and he says, they say he's a great ukulele player. Play me a song. It's terrible. I'm thinking the guy is terrible. The thing was out of tune. Like, I buy him a tuner, he's genius on it, but I didn't know. And we're stuck here. We're stuck on our album, skipping in the same spot, believing this lie and defending it. You can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. And what this means is that the people who faked the moon landing, right? You got to understand Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone does. His conclusion is that the CIA killed his uncle, President Kennedy.
Yes.
I presume he's done his research. I concur to his conclusion. We have Robert McNamara, who said the American public is against entering the Vietnam War, defense secretary during the Vietnam War. He goes to the CIA and says, can we have something like Pearl Harbor, which went from 90% against the war to 90% for World War II in one day. They create this fake attack of a Vietnamese ship attacking an American ship. Congress passed a law. They started a war in writing based on something that was completely fabricated by the CIA. Even Wikipedia now admits they fabricated it. So here's what you have to understand. If they're willing to kill their own duly elected president, willing to kill 58,220 of their own soldiers without reason, I don't think they have a problem faking a video image. And these people are at large. According to Betty Grissom, her husband came home from work on January 26, 1967, after he hung a lemon on the top of the rocket and brought up reporters to say this thing is a piece of junk on national TV. Days later, he comes home from work, interviewed her for 4 hours. He said, hon, For some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I've been here for years, never seen the CIA one time. Why are they here today? The next day, he's dead from faulty equipment. So the first document of our country is not the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence, which says
Yep.
when any government, including our own, becomes destructive of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. It is our legal right to dissolve the federal government. What's the first one? Life. They are murdering their own people. First, they're taking a third of our income to fake the moon landing. And then they're using a third of our income to pay the salaries of CIA agents who are killing our friends and neighbors for exposing their crimes. And these people are at large. They're still saying the moon landings are real. They're still creating all these videos, thousands of videos to defend the moon landing, which wouldn't be necessary if they really went. Why would they care? You know, and so we have to understand this is very serious. They really did fake the moon landing. And here's the interesting thing. That first NBC News director, when he said this will cause a civil war, I'm like, you're overreacting. And basically my conclusion was, okay, so what you're saying is, if we show the public how corrupt the federal government is, it'll bring down the corrupt federal government. Isn't that the point? And so, but now I see it's the linchpin. It's the finger out of the dike. It will enrage people more than who shot JFK, more than 9/11. They cried. They got down on their knees and prayed. They waved their flag. They defended it with thousands of YouTube videos. It wouldn't be necessary if they really went. It's a straw man. It has to be supported. That's why there are all these videos. And so that's very dangerous. You can't have in your neighborhood one child disappear a month for 50 years and go, well, just one of those things, I guess. Oh, well. No, you do something about it.
Right.
And these people did fake the moon landing, did spy on president's phone calls of both parties, and they're running the show. They're at large. And from what I understand, their kind want to depopulate the world by 94%. And I don't think they're twiddling their thumbs, hoping it's going to happen. I suspect they have a plan. And so these people are dangerous, and they are running the show. I don't think presidential appointments of departments should be allowed. The FBI needs to, their rank and file needs to choose the FBI director. The rank and file of the FDA needs to choose the director. You have corrupt presidents of both parties appointing corrupt people who when their rank and file want to expose crimes, they say, do so and you're fired. And they've got a mortgage and kids to feed, and they comply. And that's another problem that people need to see. Where are people willing to die for what is right, like our founding fathers and mothers? After the Boston Massacre, which is probably half their fault anyway, and 4 people were killed, they said, that's enough. Apollo 1 fire, Gulf of Tonkin, whatever else, Kennedy, is that what people don't realize they're going to die anyway, right? So
I mean,
Eisenhower
I was listening to this, and it's just the way it stacks up. If this is your first exposure to, pursuing the truth, as so many of us do, and we embrace it, when the whole tapestry of NASA and the allure of Camelot and Kennedy and the space race and everything involved with it, just everything involved with it. If, it's funny because this is the one, you said this is the linchpin. I agree, because now people are coming around and they agree that the election was stolen in 2020, but they don't even care. But you're so right about this. There's something about this moon landing that, and you mentioned in the book, which I think was very astute, that this was the perfect event to fake because it raised the morale of the country during Vietnam. This post-Tet offensive, the debacle of Vietnam, the lies of that, and it just all of a sudden we felt great again. And I guess one of my questions was, reading some of your adventures, how you were abducted and bullied and threatened. like so many whistleblowers and truth tellers are, how are you still alive? What keeps you alive? Why do you think?
Well,
Because I think you're the most you're one of the most credible in this space, no pun intended, in this section of truth finding. How are you? You know what I mean? We just like in the last 60 days, we've lost 2 Boeing whistleblowers. I'm sure you're aware of that. 2.
yeah, well, that
So,
involved money. That's
okay.
why. Mine doesn't involve money anymore. The Apollo program's over with. If I were saying this back then, I probably wouldn't be
Oh,
here
okay.
today.
I didn't even
Uh,
think of that. I didn't even think of
well, people are killed for $20 at an ATM. Imagine what they're going to do for $250 billion.
right. So that's one
Now,
of the reasons the big pharma whistleblowers, several big pharma whistleblowers have died this year that were due to testify
yeah,
at the poll.
the main thing is divine intervention. And as you know from the book, when I was first asked to make this documentary, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, I turned it down because my preliminary investigation with shadows intersecting and 2 of the 3 astronauts not giving interviews and the administrator of NASA resigning right before the first mission without explanation, Soviets
Right.
being more advanced, and we can't even go 1,000th the distance to the moon today is as far. I'm like, something doesn't smell right. And if I start overturning these rocks and they ended up actually faking the moon landings, that could be dangerous. So I turned it down. And then, like I said, it dawned on me, I'm going to die anyway. It does make
That's the
sense that there's
spirit.
yeah, it makes sense that there's a judgment to come, and there is a battle
Yes, there
between
is.
right and wrong. And the first layer of right and wrong is truth and lies, because the
Yep.
people who are doing wrong are lying. And half of all crimes are conspiracies, right? Half are done in the heat and emotion of the moment, and half are plotted out in advance. So
Yep.
half of all crimes are conspiracies. That's what they are. That's why there's a code, federal code conspiracy. And I realized that this is worth dying for, and people need to see that. This is historic, and people, maybe it's not a belief in the afterlife. All that they have is this particular world. Now, as you know from the book, when I found this footage, I was literally followed from church late at night. They zapped my car, disabled it while I'm driving down the road. 3 people are chasing me on foot. I hire a cab to go to CNN. I'm literally at the back door of CNN trying to get this footage in to a friend I know who works there. And I'm surrounded by government agents who take the tape, drug me with truth serum to the point of vomiting, ask me a series of questions, where's the original or whatever. And I escape their custody, make my way back to Nashville and pee in a cup. And I'm like, I got him. I'm going to prove that I was
Right.
drugged by this drug that only the federal government would have. And I'm trying to outwit the CIA. You know how many CIA agents it takes to screw in a light bulb?
No.
Well, I could tell you, but then I have to kill you. And so I give this urine sample to a friend of mine, and he puts it in a lab in his name. And after a few days, I'm like, what were the results? Let's get them. I'm going to give them to the NBC news director. He says, well, there's a problem. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. And I'm like, yeah, so what? He says, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was a urine sample. So the people were like, we don't know who you are, but please take your business elsewhere. So, and then I was kind of rescued at one point by 2 guys who were good guys in the government.
I remember that. You were lost in
this
the
would
woods.
make it, yeah, this would make an incredible feature film of itself. What
Yes.
happened to me making this movie.
Yes.
And I got the impression, as best as I could tell, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I've already said it, but I think they were Marine intelligence. One of them had on a United States Marine watch, and they had my back. But worse things have happened very recently. As you know, right as I'm editing my book, I'm put in touch with a gentleman by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. Now, every branch of the military has their special ops intelligence division, the CIA, you could say, of that branch of the military. The Army has it, the Navy has it, and the Air Force has it. And
Right.
the Air Force's special ops intelligence headquarters is Cannon Air Force Base, where this guy was chief of security. Well, as he's dying, fearing the judgment of God, and if you believe in that, confessing equals forgiveness. And so his son is there, and his dad, who was chief of security, the son verifies he lived right across from the base. His dad was chief of security there. First thing he says, it's not in the book because his son was still alive, but he says, "I'm a murderer. I killed a coworker in 1968." The son brings in the military police so that the murder victim's family can have closure. And he's there during the investigation, and they say, "Who did you kill? So and so. Why did you kill him?" He said, "Well, we eyewitnessed them filming the moon landing and on fake moon set, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968 at Cannon Air Force Base. And my coworker thought it was morally wrong, was going to tell the reporter, and I killed him to keep it a secret." President Johnson was there the first day of filming. And this is one reason I believe, if not the reason, why he didn't run for re-election when he was eligible, because the faking of the moon landing would be in the next term. And what if he got caught? But he was curious, and he was there, and he gave the chief of security, Cyrus Eugene Akers, all this is in my book, a list of 15 VIPs who were allowed in. We published that list in the book. Some of these people are still alive, including
Yep.
Eugene Krantz, Buzz Aldrin, and a few other people. And as I'm confirming this information, this person, his son, who I'm confirming all the details of his father's experience,
Right.
his two government agents show up at his house and threaten to kill him and his family if he ever talks to me again about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud. This is about 2 years ago. The FBI was involved, the White House was involved, and the United States Senate Intelligence Committee was involved in investigating and providing whistleblower protection for the man's son. This is very serious. This is very real. They really did fake the moon landing. And, maybe someday Tucker Carlson will see the other half of what he said. We have to face facts. There are several quotes. I put one at the end of each chapter of the book. The two that come to mind are first one attributed to Mark Twain
Yep.
that says, "It is easier to fool people." Again, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. The moon landing is the perfect example of that. And then from Men in Black 3, that oddly enough has Apollo launch in it, the alien
Really?
character. Yeah. He says something very profound. He says, "The bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie."
Which is
We
very,
have to
very powerful.
love truth. We have to be able to be willing to be wrong. We have to face facts. They cannot have 1,000 times greater technology in the past and in the future.
Yeah.
Shadows cannot intersect at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart in sunlight. My critics say that videotape is them faking being halfway to the moon. And we have a deathbed confession of an eyewitness, all of which has been verified he was there. So that's the way that it is. They really did fake the moon landing. It's so much more historically significant than if they had actually gone, and the truth is not known. And as you know, for the first time, I tell in the book, it's my last kind of official statement on the matter, these X-Files feature film worthy CIA encounters I had
Yes.
to endure to put up with this, with divine intervention, because I went from not wanting to do the film for fear it could be dangerous, it's true, to realizing it is worth dying for. They did fake the moon landing, and that's needs to be known. Otherwise, we will never have honest government ever again.
It's interesting. And another reason it's such a pleasure to have you on. We were talking about the Bible early on, and you have to have a sense of humor, and you have to have a belief in that higher being, in our case, God, to go down these roads because they defy all the narratives. And for people, I just want to remind people that a funny thing happened on the way to the moon was the movie you made in 2001, I believe, right? And then
Right.
in 2004, Astronauts Gone Wild, an investigation into the authenticity of moon landings, Apollo 11 monkey business, false photographed, unedited, and then you also produced something, the Apollo 11 post-flight press conference. And that's just the tip of the iceberg at SIBREL.com. I mean, if you, again, I know because I've gone through these evolutions, these emotional and intellectual evolutions throughout my life with different things in history. And I know if people are hearing and seeing this for the first time, they've got to think, who are these two wackos on the screen? But all you have to do is take the logic and the science. One of the things for me is, and you brought it up in the book several times, the very first try we got to the moon. And how many tries does it take to get the B-28 bomber right, to get a weapon correct, to get a refrigerator right, the combustion engine, all these things? It took decades and years. And, who's the light bulb guy again? I forget. Edison?
Thomas Edison.
Edison, okay.
How 1,000 filaments to find one that worked.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
And then boom.
NASA has never kept a schedule. NASA has never kept a schedule a single time.
Ever.
In their entire history. They've postponed returning to the moon 5 years, 10 times. They've just did it again. And yet the most complicated mission of all time is the only time they kept a schedule.
Right.
And in fact, in aerospace and the entire history of aerospace, there's not a single flying machine that worked on the first occasion, not even the motorized kite of the Wright brothers. In fact, with 10 years newer technology than Apollo, the 747 was rolled out. It took 168 attempts to get the fuselage off the ground. Can you imagine? And somehow they can do this with 1/millionth of the computing power of a cell phone. And yet today, with 5 decades better rockets and computers, they can only go 1,000th the distance to the moon, which has never happened in the history of the world, that there was a greater technology in the past and in the future, which means it was a bluff. We have to face facts. That's just the way it is. We have photographic proof. We have them faking being halfway to the moon. We have an eyewitness with people on a list who were verified to be at Cannon Air Force Base at the time. What more proof do you need? It's a sad fact, but it's a fact. And if the truth comes out, it really is the linchpin and the finger out of the dike. It may have killed fewer people than any other government fraud, but it's the one that's going to enrage the public the most. Maybe the stock market will go down, maybe the dollar will go down. So be it. We can't keep painting over mold.
And
we
it's
can't deny that we have gangrene, or the whole nation is going to die, and these criminals will still be at large running the show.
And it's not like this. It's not like you just plucked this out of the blue. Right now, we are surrounded by the polls, and the sentiment is proven constantly. No one trusts the media anymore, but we're surrounded by, yesterday I did a story on, it's now come out that the FBI was helping get rid of evidence and cover, manipulate the current case that Trump is in, that they just delayed the documents tape. It just came out that the FBI staged the photos of him, of those documents in his house. Those are staged. And it's like every day we find out, and my fear is that we're going to be immune to it. Here's my fear, Bart. People are going to, maybe they read your book, maybe they see this, and then they go, well, so what if it was? What can we do about it? That's my fear, because I hear that with the stolen election. I hear it, now that the vaccine has been proven to be unsafe and ineffective. But what did the commercial just say yesterday on the radio? It's safe and effective. Go get the booster. So if they're okay with that, are they just going to go, oh, let it go? It was 60 years ago. Do you think people will be moved to really examine their government by this?
Yeah, I do think so. Because, you can have a minor explosion or a big explosion. This is a big explosion because it's emotional. The reason why people keep defending the moon landing fraud, despite overwhelming proof that it was fraudulent, is emotional. They can be scientists, they can be aerospace people, but it's become an emotional bond to them. I did a show of I believe, sincere person who's anti-deep state or anti-corruption. And he had me on audio for 10 minutes, followed by an Apollo astronaut who has the audacity to claim to be a Christian on video for an hour, fawning over him when he's an accessory to multiple homicides. In his mind, I know America has gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. Now,
Okay.
this is the fact that they didn't go. And if it comes out publicly acknowledged, confessed by an astronaut, whatever, I think it's different. I think it's going to crush people's hearts. I think it's going to enrage people. It's emotional. They're going to one extreme to the other. Again, we've already gone through the trauma of Kennedy being killed. To
Yep.
change who did it and why is changing a small percentage of the
True.
tragedy.
Very true.
This is a big extreme, going
Mhm.
from pride and waving our flag and defending it to the far extreme. They took all this money and they went to every newspaper, every TV station. Everybody said they were on the moon,
Right.
and they're not.
Well, they all got the
Except,
same.
of course,
They got the
except, of
same
course,
press
the
release.
AI.
Yeah.
Except, of course, the AI in November. So either Google's multi-billion-dollar, decades-long research is a piece of junk, or they fake going to the moon. I wonder which one is true. You
Right.
know, that's why they're suppressing that story. No news outlet has that story, not even RT. So Fox is not your friend, and neither is RT your friend.
Well,
Because
mainstream media,
yeah.
they probably know the damage it would do to what's left of their credibility. But you brought it up before, the technology, and this is an iPhone 8. I know it's an embarrassment. I only have an 8. My kids have the new ones. But even the technology, that's there's the logic and the way you've put it together with the science. In other words, why wouldn't we? I mean, can you imagine right now in the middle of the chaos, if we had that technology and we just like flew to the moon, it would be if we could do it, it would be such a big morale lift. Wow, we went back to the moon under Joe Biden, and now we're getting all this stuff. And even the way you go explain the moon rocks, some of them were the moon rocks were debunked. They weren't even.
Yeah,
How did you
they
even?
opened a
Yeah.
curator in the Netherlands, opened a hermetically sealed box a few years ago. Neil Armstrong said out of his own mouth, he personally picked up this particular rock, personally put it in his pocket, personally brought it to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. They immediately sealed it in a hermetically sealed box, put it in a museum. And then a curator apparently watched a funny thing happen on the way to the moon, got curious, opens it up, puts it under a microscope, and it's a piece of petrified wood, which kind of looks out of this world. But unless there's trees growing on the moon, it's a fake.
Right.
So it made a little bit of the internet news at the time. Moon rock proves to be fake.
I remember that.
But no reporter asks, okay, if the moon rocks are fake, what about the moon mission? The fact is, they have this deadline to go to the moon, pressure, all that pressure. And von Braun, 6 weeks beforehand, takes a holiday to Antarctica, where he collects hundreds of pounds of lunar meteorites, which are easy to find in Antarctica.
Yep.
That's what they use to fake the moon landings. And then the Chinese probes that I spoke of, they did their analysis of multiple ingredients in moon rocks, percentages of whatever,
Right.
carbon or copper or whatever they're made out of. And they compare them with the Apollo samples, which were, an estimate. And they're dramatically different for some reason. And so, the moon rocks is not proof. And neither is the alleged reflectors on the moon, because they were bouncing lasers off the moon in the late 50s, according to Scientific American magazine.
Yeah, you
without
don't
any
you don't
lasers
even
on there.
you don't even need a
Yeah.
reflector if you have the right laser.
And they could have just chosen reflective, areas as the landing sites. And of course, Russia and Chinese probes, unmanned probes, are there with reflectors. And then the idea that these little, shadows or pictures from the lunar surface from NASA prove that they went to the moon. You're like, okay, so for the same organization that faked pictures at Cannon Air Force Base is giving you more pictures to prove they went to the moon, and that's proof somehow?
I think this is what got me the angriest. I mean, the whole book was like, oh, I forgot about that, or oh, this makes total sense. Oh my gosh, yeah. This was what really because I remember this. I remember my age. I remember everything. I was a kid, you know, I went to high school in the 70s. I was in 8th grade well, when was I in 8th grade? I don't know. I grew up in the 60s. So I was born and, you know, the Kennedy was still alive when I was born. So this was like part of my life. And that I was in Florida at that time. That was the big thing. Oh my God, the models for Christmas, the Saturn V models. Remember the lunar module models? And then
I had a Saturn V toy myself.
yeah, isn't that and they actually got us so people thinking, yes, they did get us into orbit. We made it into space. And you know, the sad part is the minute they were out of view, that's when the manipulation started, that's the heartbreaking part of it. So it's not like you know, it's not like, well, those rockets didn't work. Of course they worked. They just didn't work well enough to get to John F. Kennedy's deadline. And we were going to lose a lot of face on the world stage.
Well, yeah, everything becomes more efficient and takes less effort over time. Like light bulbs are brighter with less electricity. So if you can go to the moon in a tall rocket in 1969, you should be able to go to the moon in a smaller rocket today. And yet Elon Musk says it's going to take 8 rockets taller than the Saturn V. Isn't that interesting? When technology is supposed to be becoming more efficient. You know, I saw something recently. Someone emailed me this picture on eBay of a metal lunchbox from 1969 of the Apollo, you know, crew on the moon.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, a graphic of it.
I remember those.
That just kind of infuriated me. I mean, they're literally propagandizing children,
Well,
not just the adults. You know what I mean?
well, the whole targeting kids is that's as old as time. I want to ask you very quickly, and I know you have to wrap up. NASA's Kelly Smith, is that the current engineer? Is it a he or a she, the Kelly?
Kelly's a guy, and
Okay,
I can show you that clip if you want to do screen share. You can
sure.
use.
But so just to make sure, people, they're going to have trouble with this. Some people are going to have trouble with this, and current NASA engineers and current government people are very comfortable saying, well, no, we don't have that technology, and the radiation would still kill a human if we went above 300 miles in space. And what do they call it? The Van Allen belt or something? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's called the Van Allen radiation belt.
Radiation
Most people
belt.
don't know this, but
Yeah.
there's a really thick, approximately, you know, it varies, but it's somewhere around 30,000 miles thick, but it doesn't start until 1,000 miles up. So every manned mission in space has been well below that, about 750 miles below the beginning of this thick, deadly radiation. Now, they sent up probes, I think in 2014, with Geiger counters to measure the radiation. And I asked NASA for those Geiger counter readings, and they said it was a military secret. And I'm like, okay, when you send probes to the sun to find out the temperature of the sun isn't a military secret. When you sent probes to Jupiter to find out how much helium is in Jupiter's atmosphere, the amount of helium isn't a secret. So why would the amount of radiation surrounding the Earth and the Van Allen radiation belt, why would that be a secret? Because it would prove that the radiation is 100 times a lethal dose, and they needed time to manipulate the figures before they released the data. And so here's a video of Kelly Smith talking about the radiation belt, where he says out of his own mouth that the technology necessary for an astronaut to go through the radiation and survive has yet to be invented. So
and this is 2021 or 20?
I think he said this in 2014.
2014. Okay.
Yeah. So here's that clip here. I'm going to make it full screen, and I don't know if you can share audio directly through the feed. If not, I'm going to turn my microphone toward the speaker.
Yeah, go ahead and turn up. Yep.
On navigation and guidance for Orion. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth. 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belt, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
So there you go. They must solve these challenges before they send people through this region of space, which means the technology to travel to the moon has not been invented yet because of the radiation. Not to mention they're going to need multiple fuel trips as well. So that's their own astronaut saying so, their own engineer rather, saying that the technology to survive that radiation field, which you'd have to go through to the moon and back, that technology to survive hasn't been invented yet. We must solve these challenges of radiation before we send people through this region of space, which means the surviving radiation challenges haven't been solved yet.
I just printed out
mannequins orbiting the moon, right? You can drive cars and play golf on the moon with 1960s technology, and yet 50 years later, you can only send mannequins to orbit. That's kind of weird.
Well, we have a mannequin for president. So anyway,
no comment on that one. I tried to get involved in politics.
I printed this out this afternoon. This is from May 8th. You're going to love this. This is the article. People think 1969 moon landing was faked and one man is to blame, Bill Casing. And I know Bill Casing was one of your fellow researchers. Well,
yeah, he worked for Rocket 9 on site at NASA for 6 years during the Apollo program. He had security clearance second only to von Braun.
I remember.
He actually was an English major. And as such, he would edit memos going from the Pentagon to von Braun and from von Braun to the Pentagon. On von Braun's case, because English was not his first language, and on the Pentagon's case, because these were military people who didn't have very good grammar, and or language that was congenial. So anyway, he edited a memo that von Braun warned them that the odds of going to the moon in Kennedy's goal without killing the crew on the first attempt was only a 1 in 10,000 chance. And so Johnson came up with the code name at Cannon Air Force Base for the real Apollo project called Project Slam Dunk, which meant if you fake the mission, you can 100% guarantee a success, which means it's easy, which means it's a slam dunk. And not only that, he said the way that NASA operated was the exact opposite of logic. What they would do is they would rotate department from department. So one department would be working on, let's say, the spacecraft door. The moment they started understanding everything, they would be removed, put to another project, and a new team would come on the door. And they constantly rotated people so no one would see the full picture. And the idea that things worked was an assumption. And so they had all these people assuming they went to the moon. We had ground crews who could tell no difference between a real flight and a simulated flight, and they're in the command center. So if they can't tell the difference, I don't think you and I can tell the difference as a child on our living room floor.
Well, look at all the people. I remember being on the beach in Fort Pierce, Florida, and looking north to, at the time, Cape Canaveral or Cape Kennedy or Cape Canaveral. I forget how it's flipped back and forth. But at the time, and so that you get these retorts like, well, I saw it with my own eyes. Are you saying that rocket didn't happen? No, not at all. We're saying you saw these crews get launched into space, and then after you no longer saw them, you saw what the government wanted you to see. And here's your favorite. This is from 3 days ago. Next moon landing will be more difficult, warns a man who's been before. And then Charles Duke, who took part in the 1972 Apollo mission. So here's a guy in 1972, that was post walking on the moon. And now he's telling us, oh, it's going to be difficult. Now, what's that all about?
Yeah, because technology becomes easier, more proficient over time, not
Right.
more difficult.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, the first one was fake and the next one they're
Right.
trying to really go, which obviously is the case. They just got the Artemis unmanned spacecraft through reentry, and they
Yep.
said had astronauts been on board, they would have been killed.
And that's something. Yeah,
Funny
that's a
they did
story.
it so successfully in 1969.
Yeah.
And 5 decades better technology would have killed the crew.
There you
Isn't
go.
that interesting? You know, I don't know what the problem is with people other than this is just an emotional attachment to them. And it was an emotional attachment to me too. But for some reason, some people will accept a bitter truth more than a sweet lie, that they value it more. And I do.
Right.
I get criticism all the time from my wife, from my friends. I feel like life is a journey. Life is a school. I'm constantly going to the principal's office for making some stupid mistake. And I admit it. When I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And thank you for pointing it out to me. And I'm sorry. I don't know why that's so hard for people. It could be the American culture being, overly prideful. And that's going to cause a problem. Pride prevents people from seeing the truth. And without knowing the truth, that means you're making decisions based on lies, which is dangerous.
And you
It's very dangerous.
you combine lies and emotion, and God knows where we're going to end up as a country,
Well, it's more than just the United States faked the moon landing, which they did. It really shows you the condition of mankind, that mankind is so immature and lost that they can't tell the truth, that they set a goal that they can't accomplish. So they lied and embezzled money and murdered people to cover it up, and continue to try to cover it up to this day.
Well, I said to a friend of mine about you being on the show, because a couple weeks ago, I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Gage, the guy who he's the founder of Architects and Builders for 9/11 Truth or whatever. We had a pretty in-depth interview, much like the one we're having here. And, that's a sensitive subject. And he says, so why isn't that, what I asked you at the beginning, why hasn't anybody tried to kill you? And they have tried to threaten you and you're still alive. And then my friend said, were you trying to get yourself killed? And I said, well, thank God my audience is so much smaller. I'm so low on the totem pole. They're not going to be going after me. They're going to be going after Tucker and Joe Rogan and Alex Jones. They're not even going to have time to get to me, but I'm going to keep pumping out the truth because, again, I thought you did a really good job on this book, and there was so much humor and emotion in it as well. And you were just talking about it a moment ago about admitting you're wrong. And I loved your reflection on you would call yourself out if you went too hard, or you said in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have approached that astronaut that way that I did. And I've learned a lot since then. I wouldn't redo that because did it get us to the truth, or did it just, and I think with any truth seeker, we have to be, get beyond the gotcha. And you certainly are. I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you and seeing your documentation and your sense of humor and everything. And I think that scares a lot of people. The truth seekers, we have to have that sense of humor and that compassion when they say, are you kidding me? And we need to say, like you do and I do and many others, no, it's okay. It's okay to freak out. I was freaking out too. But check this out. It's okay to freak out. The boosters have all kinds of crap in them, and that's why your kid keeps getting sick. Don't be embarrassed. We all got taken, and I think that's the road we're going to have to take, because you're right about the pridefulness of it. You get that when people start talking about the wars, because
and the other extreme, which is just as deadly, is making decisions based on fear.
Yes.
Fear is imaginary, actually.
Yep.
And so let's just say we live in New York City and we see on the news a tiger escaped from the zoo. And that was a year ago. I guess I'm never going to leave my house ever again, right?
There you go.
And
Yeah.
so because I'm imagining there's a tiger outside my door when there's not. And so fear is a fantasy, and people are making life-changing decisions based on fear. If you've taken a pharmaceutical drug like I have for blood pressure or whatever, and you have the courage to read the potential side effects, there's a lot. And almost every medicine says you could die,
Yeah.
you know, and or go blind or become sterile. You know, almost all of
Yep.
them say
Yep.
something like that. And you know, you don't take an aspirin if you don't have a headache, and you don't put your arm in a sling or a cast if it's not broken,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't take in medicine for an illness you don't have. That's dangerous. And
Yes, it
so
is.
people were making decisions based on fear, and
Right.
then they're making other conclusions based on pride, you see? And so both are based on fantasies and not reality. And why humanity or Americans are more subject to that, it's probably cultural and maybe possibly intentional by the people who faked the moon landing and want us to believe all these lies. They're
Right.
conditioning people. I
Yeah.
think this little thing we went through for the last 3 years was mainly a training exercise
Oh, yeah.
for the public to be conditioned to submit and to forfeit rights for the sake of their own self-preservation. And it's my understanding that the Constitution doesn't change if it rains. And then, therefore, it wouldn't change if there's diseases or
Exactly.
earthquakes or whatever else. Doesn't have anything to do with it. The Constitution says that the government will not establish a religion or prevent the free exercise thereof. And they closed churches. And then they opened them and
Yep.
said, you can have church, but you can't sing. Then they said you can't have a wedding. And then they said you can have a wedding, but you can't have dancing. Now, from what I understand about the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, everyone's equal. So what we have is one group of people telling another group of people that they can have 4 people at their son's birthday party, but if they have 5, they'll arrest them and turn off their electricity. So that means one group of people is the masters and the other group of people are the slaves. You
Yes.
see that? The
Well,
best way to
yeah.
have a slave is to trick them into thinking they're free, but they're not free.
Right.
Not at
It's
all.
like
There is no
you,
free speech
yeah,
in America.
you're allowed
You
to go
know?
to the mall. Just remember to stand in the circle 6 feet from everybody and wear your mask at the concert and sit 5 seats away. You're allowed to do it. You have your freedom, but you're right. That was such a predictive programming. And
Well, the government is not our parents, and I don't care if 9 out of 10 people are dropping dead. They can advise us
that's
not to go
true.
shopping, but it's not the right of one person to tell another person that they cannot leave their home, that they cannot open their business, that they cannot go shopping. Even if 9 out of 10 people are dropping dead, the 10% who are still alive still need tuna fish and toilet paper. And it's not the right of one person to tell another person that they can and cannot go shopping, can and cannot open their business, can and cannot go to church, have a wedding, have more than 4 people. If one equal person is telling another equal person what they can do and not do at church or the wedding, then they're not equal, are they? And why people don't see that, I have no idea. And if government can work from the top down, then it can certainly work from the bottom up. I
Yes.
don't understand why the federal government is telling a governor what to do or why a governor is telling a mayor what to do.
True.
Why not have it go the opposite direction? Why is a resident association telling a homeowner that they can't plant a garden in their front yard because it's not aesthetically pleasing? It's not their property. They don't live there. The landowner has the precedent over rights, not the resident association. And if the resident association wants to ban guns or allow open carry, it's not the right of the mayor to tell a neighborhood where that mayor does not live what they can and cannot do. And it's not the right of the governor in Sacramento to tell the mayor of Los Angeles what they can and cannot do. I don't understand if electricity can go down a wire left to right, it can go down a wire right to left.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, we have this form of government that's the same as tyranny for the entire history of the world. There's never been a moment in history where the people who ran the world had the people's best interest in mind.
That is
Never happened.
that is
Why
so
should we
true.
think why should we think now is any different? Don't you realize Hitler was popular and
Yeah.
our current tyrants are popular too? But they're telling other people what they can and cannot do, which is slavery, not freedom. When will people realize that this is completely backwards, that we need bottom up government and not top down, which is tyranny? Pretty simple.
And the only way we get to the truth, and this is a great way to wrap up. First of all, will you come back on the show? Because I think we can go a lot further than NASA in our conversations. I'd love to talk, uh, Christianity principles, the founding of the country, the Constitution. There's so many things that we're leaving behind. I think it's hurting us. But the fact that our government, we've now relabeled questions as, well, you're undermining democracy, you don't care about election integrity, and all we're doing is asking questions. You get this from the elite left and the elite right. You get it from the experts. You get it from people that have been brainwashed. You say, excuse me, I have a question, and the government's attitude is, how dare you question me? And we've let it go way too far, and that's why I was so thrilled to have you on. And tell people again where they can find you, what they'll find at SIBREL.com. I know that's your website, but what they'll find there. It's great stuff.
Yeah, just my last name, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, REL, SIBREL.com. My book, Moon Man, is in audio, which I read myself, Kindle or print. It's interactive with 17 video links, which are there. You can watch for free now. And I have another book that just came out about aliens. Are they real?
Yeah, I saw that.
Because Stephen Greer, bless his sincere heart, I believe, his number one proof that aliens are real are the Apollo astronauts told him so. So I go into whether that's real or not based on talking to experts.
I'm sorry.
What does that tell you there, right? And so, and then I have some other videos you can watch there. But the main thing is, if you really want to know, the film is only one of 17 links. The book goes into so much greater detail and argumentation than the film did. The film shows the footage of the fake photography. The book has a little bit more in-depth study of it. The book has this one link. It's so bizarre. It's hard to believe it's real. The one where we look at the national anthem from like 1970 that was transmitted, at the sign-off time on TV. Someone slowed it down as they're running the lyrics to the national anthem on the bottom of the screen that kind of ripple, and change through a Venetian blind kind of effect. And literally hidden in there, you can see it for yourself. Obey the government, submit, do not rebel. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. These are the people who run the world. Don't think that voting matters. It does not. Just ask Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul if voting matters. All they have to do is control two parties to control the country, and the government is so corrupt. When a guy leaks out, it was a complete plan that Bernie Sanders, who got twice as many votes as Clinton, got half as many delegates, which somehow that's illegal. I don't know how that's even legal. And instead of the FBI going after that rigged voting, they went after the person who leaked the information, who ended up dead, of course, from a robbery where the thief forgot to take his wallet. But in any case, they want us fighting each other, so we won't go after them. And so I stopped voting. I think taking a nap is a better use of my time. I pray for all leaders, whether I, think they're sincere or not, that they'll do what is right. And I have to contemplate that every day of my life.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
So.
Well, I do appreciate it. I want to, I should have you on closer to the election because that's worth talking about. I'm still I was having some trouble with my mic. I fixed it. If you didn't think I was paying attention, I was trying to get my mic fixed. I'm going to show up. I'm going to vote in person because I I think we have to have a presence there, even if it's for morale. Okay. But I hear what you're saying on that end. I mean, the whole concept, and see, this is where we can start our next show. The whole concept of moving into 2024 based on the falsehood of 2020 stolen election and 2022's rigged midterms is like moving into, the class on NASA or space exploration, dragging along the lies from that part of history to keep it. To me, it's just baggage. You're dragging all this along, and sooner or later we have to say stop. Here's the truth. Here's the facts. Here's the evidence. Clean the slate. Let's begin.
Well, if they killed their own president in broad daylight, if they
Yep.
faked the beginning of wars, if they faked the moon landing, I think the two-party system, which is super corrupt, both parties are corrupt. I remember being, I think, about 8 years old, watching, quote, wrestling, and how every time they punched somebody, they stomped on the ground to make a noise,
Yeah.
and it was fake. We were laughing how fake it was. We could see it as an 8-year-old. Yet, apparently, some adults think it's real. And so that's the case, I'm afraid to say, with the Democratic and Republican Party. They control both. It's irrelevant
Yeah.
who wins. And they want the most popular candidate to win, right? And so it doesn't matter. And that's a show. They're both of the same ilk. They both vote for the same things. 90% of Americans want a GMO labeling, right? I think that's fair. The most dangerous thing we do a day isn't drive our car, though that's probably the second most dangerous. It's swallowing 2 pounds of foreign substances every day.
Yep.
People wanted to know. 90% of Americans wanted to know, does this contain something that's been, genetically modified?
Right.
Seeing how it's a new technology, maybe not good for you. I don't know. They refused to do it. 90% of Americans can't have their way, when 51% should be able to have their way. So don't think it's a democracy. It's not. It's not a democracy.
It's never been a
They tell you
democracy.
when you can and can't go to church. You can have 4
Yep.
people at your birthday party, but not 5. And they fake moon landings and who knows what else. This is dangerous, and it's masquerading as a democracy, masquerading as freedom of speech. There's not freedom of speech. As you know from the book, the University of Pittsburgh Social Club hired me with the contract to show my film and lecture about it. The university forbid it, right? I had media credentials and appointment, was one of the journalists at NASA. I asked an Apollo astronaut, did he really orbit the moon? They kicked me out with security guards.
See, that's
when they
absurd.
really
That's
think
absurd.
really.
That's absurd.
Is that I thought I was in communist China or North Korea. This is the freedom of the press, freedom
Right.
of speech, right? And they don't allow freedom of speech. They don't allow freedom of the press. So there you go. What can you do? It's all a lie.
Well, again, thank you, Bart Sibrel, for everything we talked about today. It was just a real pleasure to have you on. And again, keep doing what you're doing, stay in the fight, and remember those of us who are also, pushing and trying to get to the truth. I know you've been on a lot of shows, and again, thank you for coming on.
Sure, Ken. Take care.